Our gospel for today comes from Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 43. It's found on page 53 in your New Testament if you'd like to follow along. Hear the good news for this day. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. Just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions, but Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. This is our good news for this day. Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Amen. Grace and peace to you from God, our Creator and our Savior and friend, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Do you want to know how I know I've been here for a while? I looked up while I was reading, and I knew that this pulpit is like 8 inches to the left, or to your right. It's normally right here. I looked up and I was like, man, everyone looks slightly different. Feels normal. They're not sitting where there's, they're just... I used to have this strong desire to do magic. When I was really little, I wanted to do magic tricks. I had a magic kit. I had Adrian the Magnificent one. I had a magic hat. I had a magic wand. I had it all until I realized that magic tricks were just that, tricks. I wanted to do magic, not tricks. I wanted to make things fly through the air. I wanted to turn something into something else, like my sister into a frog. I wanted to turn something into gold. I mean, even at an early age, I was worried about my college fund. And every once in a while, that desire for that ability to do magic rises to the surface. And I know I'm not alone in this one. It usually happens late at night. I'm plastered on the couch. I've been there for a while. And I realize the remote is just out of reach. And I'll try. I'll focus all of my magical powers on trying to make that remote inch just a foot closer. And it never happens. No matter how hard I try, I am of the non-magic boat. I used to always think that my life would be so much easier if I could do magic. And I'm not just talking about the ability to be as lazy as I want to be late at night. although that would help. But I'm talking about those moments of life when maybe my doubt is greatest, when I'm starting to wonder if there's really a power behind the scenes there. I could make a TV remote float through the air and remind myself there is something there. There's power there that we can't see. That out there is some greater power that we can connect to. But as it stands, I have yet to see any real-life magic. I've never seen anyone fly, other than in a plane or falling. I've never seen anybody disappear magically. I've never seen anybody magically unlock a door, although we do have a lot of smart locks now, but I'm not talking about that. I have been watching and I have yet to see any real-life magic trick. The reason I bring this up is because of a memory that has been coming to me over and over again for these last few weeks. It was a time when I was feeling particularly unmagical. I was sitting through a rather boring lecture at the University of Washington. This was a class on Eastern Orthodox Christianity. On this particular day that is etched on my brain, the professor said the name Saint Seraphim of Sarov. And I immediately let out a groan. Another name I'm going to have to remember for some test. But then he said something that brought back all of my magical hopes. Saint Seraphim of Sarov could make himself glow. Motagala, one of Saint Seraphim's disciples, said to Saint Seraphim, "I cannot look, Father, because your eyes are flashing like lightning. Your face has become brighter than the sun, and it hurts my eyes to look at you." And I thought to myself, finally, real life magic. It does exist. I knew that if I trained the same as Saint Seraphim, I could do religiously sanctioned magic. And I do it all the time. Light goes on, light goes on, light goes on. So since Saint Seraphim is an Eastern Orthodox monk, I contacted the nearest Eastern Orthodox monastery, which so happens to be on Vashon Island. Now, this monastery is the one that anybody that wants to go to during the sabbatical, we've set up to have a field trip there where the monks are going to feed you dinner and lead you through worship service. And the abbot is the guy in the middle there, Father Trifon. But now you know why this memory has kept coming back to me, because this was the first time that I'd met Father Trifon. Because I knew if I wanted to get to the miracles of St. Seraphim, I needed to find an Eastern Orthodox monk. Strange facts. Father Trifon used to be Lutheran. Missouri Synod. Then he became Catholic, and then he became... But anyway, going back to the time when I was a lowly undergrad, because of a number of odd occurrences, Father Trifon and I eventually arranged to meet in a coffee shop. And I didn't have to say, "How will I recognize you?" Because you walk into the coffee shop and there's, normal college students, 6-foot-tall man in a black robe with a black hat and a long beard, college students. So I sat down across from him. And I worked into my questions on magic. I didn't want him to think that he had taken the ferry from Vashon just so that I could be lazy on my couch late at night to make my remote fly through the air. But when I finally worked up to St. Seraphim, he asked me, "Why do you want to know?" And I told him that in this world of uncertainty, it would be great comfort to see the real world effects of faith, so that I might more easily believe in God. Good answer, right? I said nothing about flying TV remotes. Father Trifon said, Saint Seraphim didn't glow because he wanted to glow. He glowed because he was so close to God. How close to God? I asked. He immediately responded, right beside him. In the text from Luke for today, we find Jesus glowing. And every time I read this passage, I wonder, why then? Of all the times that he could have chosen to glow, why then on the mountaintop? Why not at his birth or at his baptism? Why not at First Communion or maybe when he was on the cross? What about, we have these accounts where he feeds either 3,000 people or 5,000 people. He's got a captive audience, big crowd. Why not glow then? You can bet they would have remembered the glowing guy. Maybe they would have forgotten about the meal, but how many glowing people have you seen in your lifetime? You could have given all these people something to grab onto in difficult times. But Jesus didn't glow at any of those times. He did it on top of a mountain with his three most trusted disciples, with Elijah the great prophet and Moses the lawgiver. Now, having Moses there, it gives us probably the best hint of why Jesus chose to shine then. In the Transfiguration story, Moses connects Jesus back to that Exodus story we heard earlier today, of Moses coming down from meeting God, and his face was also glowing. However, the two stories really could not be more different. Yes, Moses' face was illuminated like the face of Jesus, but where Jesus, his disciples, saw Jesus' face and wanted to worship, the people waiting for Moses at the bottom of the mountain drew back when he approached them with his glowing face, because they were absolutely terrified. In the ancient world, there were dangers we don't recognize today when it comes to holiness. You could touch the wrong thing, stand next to the wrong person, and suddenly you could find your life over. The holy was extremely volatile and dangerous, which makes sense because you're dealing with God, the most powerful being that has ever existed. His essence is in something that's holy. Our God is perfect, pure, loving, and we live in a world that's not that, not always loving, rarely pure, and never perfect. Moses had to cover his face for his people's protection, for his face became holy. Because when we think about it in the right way, the people of Moses' day were afraid of God. And they had good reason to be afraid. But the disciples of Jesus, instead of being afraid of Christ's shine, offered to build a dwelling there. They could live with it. The disciples lived in a time of similar holy consequences. Yet these are two completely different reactions. Another departure point for Moses' story is a strange omission, something they left out that you wouldn't think they'd leave out. When Jesus comes down the mountain, Luke never talks about Jesus' glow again. It doesn't say that Jesus stopped shining at any point in the story. Yet none of the crowd at the bottom of the hill, at the bottom of the mountain, says anything about it. You'd think they would notice. If you were glowing, I would tell you. If I started glowing up here, wouldn't you be like, Pastor Adrian, something's happening. I'm bit by a radioactive spider. If I start glowing, I hope that you would tell me. So since no one mentioned it, did Jesus lose it? It's when Moses comes down the mountain that we really realize that he's shining. Why would Jesus not have maintained his glow? I think the lack of fear on behalf of the disciples and a lack of record of what came of his glow are linked together. They're solution one and the same. In the account of that glowing Easter Eastern Orthodox saint. After Father Seraphim's disciple asked him to put a dimmer on his shine, this is what the saint said to his follower, Metabolov. Don't be afraid. At this very moment, you yourself have become as bright as I am. You yourself are now in the fullness of the Spirit of God. Otherwise, you would not be able to see me as you do. Christ has brought us in to a new kind of holiness. The light that was his, the light that was others, has become ours, has become the disciples, has become the people at the bottom of the mountain. Metabolov didn't realize that he was part of that light until after. He could not tell that he was already shining the same as his master. As I said, holiness is dangerous. It was and is the most powerful force in the world. It knocks people to their knees. It changes people's lives if they even experience it for a single second. And yes, it can be extremely terrifying. Jesus didn't shine out on that day, on that mountaintop, to show that Moses got it wrong. Jesus shone out on that day to draw us into that holiness. The holiness that for so long had been an other thing, a dangerous thing, a thing to be kept far away. Sure, you want it there, but don't touch it. The disciples did not fear the light because they were in it. The disciples didn't ask for a veil. They asked to live with it, to build a dwelling so they could stay there forever. Christ has brought a new face to holiness. A face of love. A consoling face that is more like God than we ever realized. We are now allowed to see the face behind the veil. The thing people begged for generations of humanity is now given to every single person on this earth. The magical light of Christ and Saint Seraphim is no trick. It was done to bring others into the light. It was not a momentary reminder that'll later be forgotten. Hey, look at that cool thing that happened then. This light is a life-giving change that can never, never be dimmed. Jesus does not allow the disciples to stay on the mountaintop because that light cannot be contained in one place. The light had already gone ahead of them to the bottom of the mountain. Sitting across from that Russian Orthodox abbot, that glow that I wanted so badly, is already within me. And even though, I'm sad to admit, I'll probably never be able to make a TV remote float through the air, it's not such a bad thing. For it's not the magic that matters. What good is flying or shining if you can't find a reason to hope? If you always feel like the transcendent God is just out of your reach? That's not true anymore. Somehow, in this world of normal things, the God of love is there. No tricks, no veil, just hope. Amen.